Welcome to Roundabout Oxford, a podcast from the University of Mississippi Libraries.
In this episode of Roundabout Oxford, I, Harley Rogers, science librarian and something of a hobby enthusiast myself, interview people from across the library on their own hobbies and special interests. Listen along to hear how some of our faculty and staff spend their free time, and perhaps be inspired to pick up a new hobby yourself.
My name is Greg Johnson. I am head of Archives and Special Collections and Blues curator and professor here at the University of Mississippi. Today, I want to talk a little bit about my gardening hobby. For me, gardening is a form of almost meditation. Any problems that I've had, if there's something going on that's stressful, those kind of dissolve in the dirt when I'm out in the working with my hands in the garden. It's stress management for me, I guess. And we have such a long growing season here in Mississippi. Yeah, there's gardening work that can be done much of the year. Even during the winter months, I've often started plants from seeds indoors. And then as those get bigger and the weather warms up, I transplant those into the garden.
What has been your favorite thing to grow over the years?
It's kind of stereotypical, but tomatoes, I like planting lots of different varieties of tomatoes. They always show out a little bit. I've grown some different varieties of corn. I like growing peppers a lot. I've had a lot of success with shishito peppers. I've had quite a lot of those last year. They just wouldn't quit. Pink-eyed purple hull peas are one of my favorites to grow. Last year, I had a really good butterbean crop coming in, and deer finally discovered my garden for the first time. I've just escaped them for years. Now they're on to me, and they came in and ate every single butterbean plant that I had. So that was a little discouraging, but that's how these things go sometimes.
What would you recommend for people who were interested in getting into gardening, and maybe have various levels of experience?
You don't need land. You don't need fancy equipment. You just need curiosity and the desire to want to garden to be successful. I've seen very successful gardens from people that live in a tiny apartment, and they've created all kinds of hanging baskets and containers. Container gardening is probably potentially maybe the easiest way for someone to get started with this. Just get any type of container. You don't need a fancy, expensive planter, but something that has some holes in the bottom to allow water to drain out. You get a pot and just go and buy some potting soil and buy a start at first. Don't start things from seed necessarily the first time you're gardening. Get a plant that's already been established and buy some of those and care for those for a growing season. And I think that will give you a lot of confidence to want to continue. There's some gardening methods that kind of make things easy for beginners. There's one method called square foot gardening, where people create a raised bed and then you create a grid pattern within that bed, and you plant. And this method shows you like the proper spacing to use for different plants, and so you can get a variety of things grown in the same bed and do so effectively. So there are different methods for people, true novices who are wanting to get into gardening, some things that make it easy to start off with. And it may be that you start on one of these methods and really like it and continue to do that the rest of your life, or it may be a stepping stone to another form of gardening. I think the real key is to just dive in. Don't be scared. Even just, if you have a 5-gallon bucket lying around, drill a couple of holes in the bottom, get some soil, and pick out a couple of plants and just start real simple. And you can always add on. I think, there are a number of studies that talk about the beneficial properties of getting outside, getting some fresh air, getting your hands in the soil. I think especially if you start small and don't get overwhelmed, it can be very therapeutic. Also, I'd recommend people, if you're in the Oxford, Mississippi area, look into the Oxford Community Garden. Because maybe there are some people that you don't have a lot of space on your property or don't have any property, and you want to do something a little bit bigger than just a few containers on your porch. You can rent a plot at the Oxford Community Garden, and that might be a good way to get started. And then also, while you're there at a space like that, you're going to be seeing other community gardeners using the same space. So it's a good opportunity to ask questions of them, get tips on, what's worked well for them, what doesn't work, learn some pest control methods, things of that nature.
My name is Michelle Emanuel. I'm the head of Metadata and Digital Initiatives, and my hobby is rug hooking. Rug hooking is where you take a piece of linen and you have a design either drawn or printed on it. And then you use strips of wool and you bring that wool up through the linen using a hook. So in 2010 was the first Oxford Fiber Festival. I was trying to knit, but never really getting excited about anything that I worked on. So I went to this festival and it had lots of classes and vendors and speakers and whatever. And I happened to walk by a vendor named Lizanne Miller, who had a store in Canton, Mississippi called P is for Primitive. And she taught rug hooking and she had examples of her work. And I almost lost my mind. I said, I've never seen this. What is this? How do I do this? Mm-hmm. And so I started just driving to Canton, which is about 2 hours from here in Oxford. She had a mailing list and she would have so many classes per year. And so I would go down there and sit at the table for 2 days. Basically, I'd get a hotel room. I was just buying whatever the project was, like buying a kit. Eventually, I started buying tools, and it just sort of escalated from there. She had the store in Canton because her husband was from Mississippi, but she herself was from Maine. And this tradition is really more of a New England tradition because it works with wool, which is not really, you don't see a lot of wool like in thrift stores here. Right. So the only people in Mississippi at the time who were really doing this were the people who lived around her shop. Because of her, I started going to this rug school every summer because she is one of the directors of this school. When I was heading home after rug school last year, I knew what my project would be for this year. So the teacher I signed up for this summer has a particular style. So it's monochromatic portraits. So I sent her a picture and told her what I wanted to work on. And so when I arrive in North Carolina, she will have a packet waiting on a table for me that has my linen with my design on it that she will have drawn out. And I will show up with my hook and my cutter and my frame and other tools that I might need. Everyone will have a different project. No one else will be working on the same thing as me. And by Wednesday, you are seeing everyone's work from the previous year that they bring for a rug show. And it's, like a gallery, but it's on the floor. You're just going from rug to rug to rug, and every rug has a story. I did an Oriental rug a few years ago that took probably 10 months to finish. Whereas the one I started last year, I was finished with it by December. So it only took 6 months because it's not cheap, the materials, which is why I think starting with a kit is the way to go.
Yeah.
It's easier if you can start with like a footstool or a pillow or a bag or, something that is manageable instead of I'm going to make a rug that can fit under my dining room table.
Right.
That would be pretty big. And then work up to a bigger project. If you're not careful, it can really get out of control, which I think is true for any hobby, really.
Okay, hi, my name is Tess Graham, and I work in the J.D. Williams Library in Access Services on the first floor. And I have a formerly wild Mustang horse, and he came from a range in Nevada where he wasn't able to get enough food and water. All the horses there were rounded up, and he was a band stallion, so he was in charge of mares and foals, and he had a hard life because some of them died of starvation because again the vegetation wasn't enough and the water wasn't enough. But they were rounded up. He was re-released in California, and a biodiversity effort. They expected him to make babies, but he didn't show a lot of interest in that. And out of 20 mares, only 2 babies were born. And so they decided that he should be rounded up. He is what's called a 3-strike Mustang because 2 previous homes or adopters rejected him because he can be very aggressive and explosive. And I said, "Oh, that's just what I want." So I saw him in a video, and he was terribly cute. Then he got in a truck, and I went to Florida to pick him up. And as soon as I looked in the big paddock, I saw him, and he looked at me, and I looked at him, and I said, "Oh, you're the one." So I named him Monkey because he licks his lips like a monkey and he thinks. And when he thinks, it's so funny. His face, I mean, people, when they meet him, they say, yeah, he actually does look like a monkey. He is an earth horse, so he is down to earth, and he definitely is a little friendly. He's willful. He's very food oriented. So he is a challenging horse. The things he hates most in the world are airplanes or helicopters because that's what they use to round up the wild horses. And whenever he sees one in the sky, he stands straight up and tries to get it. He also hates 4-wheelers, and that's because those offend his sense of fairness because he does not like chasing machines. He says, if you want to chase me, you chase me on a horse or you chase me on your feet, but you do not chase me with a machine because that is not fair. His great loves in life are snacks, cats, and mini horses or baby horses, and now little kids. He loves little kids. So it took me about 10 months to be able to touch him. I would go in his enclosure with him, and I would, speak to him and offer him his food. And I would try to get a touch in, and he would say no. So after 10 months, he let me touch him, and now he lets most people touch him. And he has some broken vertebrae in his at the top of his head and lower in his back, closer to his tail. So he probably has some chronic pain. So he started on some new medications with that. And I think he'll be less sensitive to touch. I mean, I can hug him and touch him and stuff, but he doesn't like it. And he likes to watch riding lessons. He likes to watch people ride. There was a very good rider here for school, and she actually is a world-class rider. She was an Olympic alternate, and she's very, very good. And she said she would ride him, and I said, well, you can ask him. And they went round and round, and she landed on the ground a lot. And he said, you will not. And she finally said, you're right, I will not. But he loves to watch riding lessons, especially with little kids. And one time I fell out in the pasture. This is last summer. There was a lot of bad mud out there, and I fell, and he seemed very concerned. I got up, but he came over and he walked up to me and he looked at me and he said, get on, loser. And I said, this better not be a trick. And I poked him on the nose. And so I got on, and he very slowly and carefully, with deep concentration, carried me to the gate. And it was really funny because the other horses were around and he kept showing them his teeth because he was really focused. He's like, don't fall, don't let the human fall. And when we got to the gate, he turned around and he looked at me and he said, get off. And I said, yeah, I will. And he said, we're not doing that anymore. But he will offer rides on his own terms. Monkey and Destiny. Destiny is my Tennessee walking horse from an abuse case, and I told them they are my last two horses because it's a lot of work, and so I said I hope you guys live forever, but I'm ready to slow down on horses. I think you had asked earlier about some tips for starting with a horse. I would say get lessons. As I see changes in the horse world, there are more and more horses that people are just not spending time with. And there are more and more horses with what trainers call holes in their knowledge. And those are things just like umbrellas and sudden movements and things like that. It used to be you'd spend so much more time with your horse that those things would, those fears would kind of go away from the horse, but now you really kind of have to say how much does this horse know and try to evaluate them. And so it's best to do that with somebody who knows what they're doing, and those are usually riding instructors. Monkey is actually he's going to work on becoming a therapy horse. He can listen to people. He has his own website where people can speak to him on speakerphone and video phone. So he does video calls. People like to watch him eat because he's very hypnotic when he eats. He chews and chews and he thinks about things, and you can ask him questions and he'll shake his head yes and no, and he'll kind of talk with you. So he can do that. And we are also going to do a course on him being a therapy horse for someone with Down syndrome, and another course on him being a therapy horse for someone with PTSD. A lot of veterans programs use equine therapy.
That's wonderful. We will link Monkey's website in the show notes so that people can go and visit and maybe video call with him.
Yes, he lives right here in Oxford. He's very close.
Hi, my name is Adam Clemons. I'm the Digital Humanities and Data Visualization Librarian at the University of Mississippi. And today I'm going to talk about one of my hobbies, which is collecting generally. I mean, it's kind of a born collector, I suppose. I remember as a kid, I was fascinated with rocks, for instance, rocks and minerals. And so I would collect those things, and I would have any number of other collections. And it's funny because my 7-year-old son has the same sort of traits and characteristics, for better or worse. He also has a rock collection, and I routinely find rocks in his backpack that he found at school, et cetera, et cetera. And so he's very much proud of his collections that he sorts and organizes and things like that. So I kind of had that natural predisposition, I guess, to collect, which I don't think everybody has, because I know some people are like, I don't understand, collecting things, right? It's almost like equivalent perhaps to hoarding or something like that. But in my case, it gives me a lot of joy, and it's a lot of fun. I've always been a fan of sports entertainment, i.e. professional wrestling, and also video games. And so naturally, those are the areas that I primarily collect. With video games, I do have obviously several collections of games on various systems, but my focus is on consoles themselves. I have all of my childhood consoles and every Nintendo console that's ever been made, regular systems as well as handheld systems. And then I've been working to fill in gaps in some other console areas, Sony's PlayStations and Microsoft's Xbox systems. And then sports memorabilia specifically, with wrestling in particular, I've really gone kind of deep here lately into that area, collecting both autographed photographs, what are called promos, so like professional shots of wrestlers, but then also ring-worn gear. Probably really I've always collected, bits and pieces here and there, but over the last several years, I've built a pretty substantial collection of autographed photographs and promos, and then a few ring-worn items here and there. And same with, any other kind of sports memorabilia. And I used to be an avid autograph collector out on like the the circuit, so to speak, with like say sporting events. I would go to team hotels and collect autographs, and haven't had time as I've gotten older and have a family. It's more time consuming to be able to do that. But as my son gets older, I think I will take him with me because again, he seems to have the same disposition naturally, and it also helps when you're seeking autographs to have a kid with you. So it's a win-win all the way around. I think one of the thrills associated, I guess, with collection is the pursuit of finding a good, like, a steal, so to speak, of where you have a good sense of like the value of something, and you come across a listing that's, got it, wildly underpriced. Of course, it raises red flags in terms of authenticity. And there are a number of, companies that are devoted to authenticating signatures, et cetera, and other ways to assure authenticity. But again, just kind of the thrill of, I guess, the pursuit of the hunt itself, I guess, is, so to speak, is one of the cool aspects of the hobby. But yeah, those are kind of some of the places. And these days it's gotten easier for better or worse because I'm so kind of deeply connected in several like Facebook groups, for instance, and other social media platforms. And then, the best case or best of all is being able to collect the autographs and the other memorabilia in person.
What has been one of your favorite finds or one of your favorite pieces in your collection?
Yeah, to some extent, it's honestly like, whatever's, newest. And it just so happens that I met one of my childhood favorite wrestlers this past weekend. He was in Memphis, and I got a chance to hang out with him a little bit. Marcus Bagwell, or officially known as Buff Bagwell. So I was able to acquire a couple of his ring used pieces that he signed, and that was really great, and it's meaningful too, because in that case, again, that's like the best case scenario where I'm getting to add to my collection some really unique, really one of a kind pieces, but I'm also getting a chance to not just meet the person, but in this case, actually, talk to them and have, just like regular conversations about wrestling and all sorts of other things. And it was kind of a surreal moment for me, and my son being there as well. So that was a lot of fun. So those are some highlights, I guess. There's a lot more, obviously, but just to pick out a few. Some of the things that I have certainly gone up in value, but some of the things I have certainly gone down in value. So I'm not doing it for the money. I'm doing it again because it makes me happy.
Hi, I'm Abbie Norris-Davidson, and I sew my own clothes. So I first started learning when I was about 7 years old. Both of my grandmothers sew. I think I had checked out a book on historical fashion from the library and fell in love with costuming, and little 7-year-old me wanted to learn how to do that on my own. So my grandmother taught me how to sew, and I still have the very first thing I sewed. It's this little like apron that's made out of a t-shirt, and definitely looks like it was a 7-year-old's first sewing project, but it makes me smile. I'm largely self-taught. I got my first sewing machine when I was 13 and spent, my middle school and high school years kind of sewing clothes of questionable quality. But then when I was in grad school, that's when I decided that I really wanted to learn how to make, professional quality clothes. I have plans to teach one of my friends to sew in a couple weeks. So yeah, that will actually be like lugging the machine out and sewing with other people. And it's fun to, a lot of my friends are pretty crafty, so it's fun to get together and see what we're all working on.
Do you have any tips, generally speaking, for people who might want to pick up sewing as a hobby?
Start small. I know it can be really tempting to jump into sewing something really cool or really complicated, but then that can end up being frustrated if it doesn't turn out the way you want, or if you cut into your good fabric, but you haven't measured it properly or forget to include seam allowance. And then, you have to scramble to figure out how to not waste, what could potentially be tens or even, $100 worth of good fabric. There are a lot of great resources online. I use a lot of Instagram accounts to improve my sewing, and there's actually a podcast that I really love called Love to Sew, which has really helped me improve in my sewing journey. So I think looking for resources and paying attention to the projects that say, beginner friendly, are good places to start. I think that sewing is one of those things that a lot of people find intimidating, and you do need equipment, and the equipment can be expensive. But, we have sewing machines here in our Ideal Lab that people at the university are able to use for free. And there are other resources at, public libraries that you can use. And it's really cool, to wear something and someone says, "Oh, I love your dress." And you say, "Thanks, I made it." And it's always really fun to see the looks on their faces. So if it's something that interests you, I would definitely encourage you to find a way to get into it.
Roundabout Oxford was created by Brian Corrigan, Taylor Fields, Abigail Norris-Davidson, Alan Munschauer, Christina Streeter, and Alex Watson. Today's episode was produced by Elizabeth Batt, Brian Corrigan, Carmen Sanchez Garcia, Sarah Catherine Glass, Harley Rogers, and Alex Watson, with musical contributions from Brian Corrigan and Gail Herrera. Thank you for listening to Roundabout Oxford.